In a world where power often blinds the truth, one man's fight for justice uncovers the dark side of authority. Imagine being wrongfully detained by officers who think they're above the law. What happens when the tables turn, and the man they underestimated proves them all wrong? A federal agent is caught in a web of lies and racial profiling, but the courtroom holds a truth so sharp it cuts through their arrogance. Stay with us to find out how the game of justice is played when the players don't realize they're about to lose. You won't believe what happens next. Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet, now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update and be the first to hear our incredible news stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Driving home after a long day, I felt like everything was finally going smoothly. My mind was half asleep, the radio playing old tunes, and the scent of stale coffee from the cup I'd spilled earlier still lingered in the air. Classic. I'm Marcus Wilson, 40 years old, an average guy with an unusual job, but that's a story for later. There I was, cruising down the highway with just my thoughts for company, when I saw it, red and blue flashing lights in my rearview mirror. Oh! For heaven's sake, I muttered. It's like the cops have a sixth sense for ruining a peaceful night. They weren't even trying to be subtle. Siren blaring, lights flashing like they were celebrating something. I took a deep breath. All right, Marcus, play it cool, I told myself as I flipped on my turn signal and pulled over to the side of the road. I grabbed my registration and license from the glove box. No way was I giving them a reason to be extra difficult. I'm a rule-following guy. I know the drill. Two officers stepped out of their car. The first one was tall and wiry, with a mustache that looked more like a costume than anything else. The other was short, stocky, bald, definitely giving off that bad cop in training vibe. Neither of them looked like someone you'd want to share a beer with. The mustache guy leaned into my window, flashlight in hand, as if he were auditioning for a crime drama. License and registration, sir, he barked, emphasized and observed like I was the one who owed him a favor. I handed over my documents without saying a word. Evening, officers. What seems to be the problem? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. No point in making things harder than they had to be. The bald guy circled the car, shining his flashlight into every corner, like he was hoping to find a stash of drugs or a hidden treasure. Spoiler. There was nothing but empty coffee cups and some gum wrappers. The mustached officer shot me a look. Where are you headed? He asked, eyeing me like I had just confessed to a crime. Home, I said, keeping my tone calm. Long day at work. He grunted, as if what I said didn't satisfy him. He took my license and walked back to the patrol car, leaving his partner behind to stare me down. Baldy didn't say anything, just stood there, puffed up like he was daring me to make a move. Minutes passed, stretching out longer than they should have. My brain was starting to make up worst-case scenarios, but I kept watching them through the rear-view mirror as they chatted, laughing as though they were deciding where to grab dinner after this. Then the mustache guy came back. Step out of the vehicle, he ordered. That was when I started to lose my patience. Is there a reason for this? I asked, my voice firm but not aggressive. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Baldy snapped, grabbing the door handle like he was ready to drag me out himself. I sighed. Sure, officer. Let's do this your way. I stepped out, hands raised, fully aware of how this looked. A middle-aged black man being cuffed on the side of the road for no apparent reason. The cuffs clicked around my wrists. You're under arrest, Mustache declared, as though he'd just won some sort of prize. For what? I asked, incredulous. We'll figure that out later, Baldy smirked, shoving me into the back of their patrol car. The door slammed shut behind me, and I thought, all right, let's play. Let me tell you something. Being thrown into the back of a cop car feels exactly as dehumanizing as it looks. The hard plastic seat was freezing, and the smell was a blend of old sweat and despair. I sat there, my wrists digging into the cuffs, watching through the windshield as Mustache and Baldy stood outside, chatting like this was just another Tuesday night for them. Finally, they got in. Mustache took the wheel and glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a smirk plastered on his face. "Gotcha," it seemed to say. Baldy, riding shotgun, twisted in his seat to look at me. "You got any weapons or drugs in the car?" he asked, his tone thick with mock concern. I raised an eyebrow. "You already checked the car. What do you think?" Baldy grinned. "Just making sure. You people tend to forget things like that." I bit my tongue so hard I thought I tasted blood. "You people," he'd said. Classic. Racism wrapped up in a nice little package, disguised as harmless banter. The ride to the station felt slow, agonizingly slow. Every pothole felt like a personal attack. Jarred my spine while they laughed at some inside joke. I sat there, silent but fuming. I'd dealt with this kind of thing before. Black man, nice car, middle of nowhere. It's like a magnet for trouble. But this was next level. When we arrived at the station, they hauled me out of the car like I was a sack of potatoes. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a sickly glow on the chipped linoleum floors. The place smelled like burnt coffee and regret. They dragged me to the booking area, where a bored-looking officer sat behind a desk, chewing gum like it was the most important thing in the world. Mustache handed over my documents with a flourish, like he'd just caught a notorious criminal. "Marcus Wilson," he announced loudly, as if I were some kind of headline. "Brought him in for..." He paused, clearly struggling to come up with a reason. "Suspicious behavior." The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. Instead, she handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out," she muttered. I stared at her. "My hands are cuffed." She sighed, like I'd asked her to solve world hunger, and motioned for Baldy to uncuff me. As I filled out the paperwork, I couldn't help but notice the way Mustache and Baldy stood off to the side, whispering to each other. I sat there, the sounds of chuckling and muttered words filling the air, as Mustache and Baldy probably patted themselves on the back for what they clearly thought was stellar police work. Once the paperwork was done, they shoved me into a holding cell. The door clanged shut behind me, the sound echoing in the small, dimly lit room. I took a moment to take in my surroundings. The cell was grimy, the smell lingering in the air like it hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. A couple of guys were sprawled out on the benches, one snoring loudly, the other eyeing me with mild curiosity. I chose a corner, sitting down with a sense of resignation, trying to ignore the heat crawling up my neck. My mind raced, though. What were they trying to accomplish here? Were they planning on keeping me locked up all night, hoping I'd crack? Or was this just about humiliation? Time crawled. An hour passed, then maybe two. Who knows? Eventually, Mustache returned, leaning casually against the bars, a smirk tugging at his lips. "So, Marcus," he drawled, his tone thick with condescension. "What's a guy like you doing in a car like that?" I looked up at him, my face unreadable. "You mean a black guy like me?" I shot back. His smirk faltered for just a second, but he recovered quickly. "Hey, don't make this about race, buddy." I chuckled darkly. "Trust me, I didn't. You did that all on your own." His jaw tightened, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he walked off, muttering something to Baldy, who laughed like Mustache had just told him the funniest joke in the world. As I sat there, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface, I reminded myself to stay calm. This wasn't my first time dealing with this kind of situation. I knew how this game worked. Let them have their fun now. Because when this was all over, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. Morning came, and let me tell you, nothing wakes you up quite like the clang of a cell door slamming open and Baldy barking. "Time to go, superstar." They dragged me out of the cell, cuffs back on, as if it was some kind of sport. I was shuffled into a van with zero regard for comfort. Honestly, I'd had better rides on public buses. When we arrived at the courthouse, it was buzzing with activity. Lawyers in suits, board clerks, and the occasional civilian wandering around, probably having no idea they'd wandered into the wrong building. They marched me straight into the courtroom, where an older woman sat at the bench, her face sharp and unmoving. She looked like she'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. Mustache and Baldy strutted in behind me, looking like they were the heroes of the day. They gave their statements with the kind of confidence that only comes from people who think a routine traffic stop is some sort of slam dunk. We observed the defendant behaving suspiciously. Mustache said, his tone self-righteous. Refused to cooperate. Had to be detained for officer safety. Suspiciously. I couldn't help but mutter under my breath. Like driving while black is suspicious? The judge raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. She motioned for me to speak. I stood, fixing Mustache and Baldy with a calm, level stare. Your Honor, I complied with every request they made. They had no probable cause, no explanation, just cuffs and a ride downtown. If that's suspicious, then we've got bigger problems than me. Mustache rolled his eyes. Baldy smirked, but the judge wasn't buying their act. She turned to my lawyer, who handed her a folder. It was a very specific folder. Your Honor, my lawyer began. The defendant would like to submit evidence of his identity. The judge flipped through the pages of the folder. I watched her expression tighten with every page, and I caught the flicker of panic on Mustache's face as she glanced his way. I'm going to need clarification, she said, her tone sharp. I nodded, standing tall. I am Marcus Wilson, Special Agent, United States Secret Service. The room froze. You could have heard a pin drop. Mustache's jaw nearly hit the floor, and Baldy went pale. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Officer, she said, addressing Mustache, did you know this when you arrested him? Mustache stammered something incoherent, but it didn't matter. The tide had turned, and everyone in the room could feel it. I straightened up as the judge cleared her throat, her voice cutting through the room with precision. We'll be reconvening tomorrow to address this properly, she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. Officers, you may want to start considering legal representation. And just like that, the roles flipped. They had walked in smug, like they owned the place, but now they looked like kids caught stealing candy from a store. Their bravado was gone, replaced by nervous glances and stiff movements. As they shuffled out of the room, I allowed myself the smallest, most satisfying smirk. The game was on. The next day, the courtroom was packed. Reporters, lawyers, even a few curious onlookers who had probably wandered in by mistake. Mustache and Baldy shuffled in, looking completely out of their element now, like deer caught in headlights. Their swagger was gone, replaced by an anxious energy that almost made me want to laugh out loud. The judge wasted no time. She addressed the court with a voice so sharp it could have cut steel. After reviewing the evidence, she began, it's clear this case isn't about a traffic violation. It's about a gross abuse of power. My lawyer stood, calm and composed, like the entire world could fall apart around him and he wouldn't flinch. Your Honor, he said, his voice smooth, the officers detained a federal agent without cause, falsified claims, and violated his rights. My client isn't just innocent, he's the victim. The courtroom buzzed, whispers spreading like wildfire. It felt like the air had thickened with tension. Mustache tried to speak, but the judge silenced him with a glare so intense it could have melted concrete. Officer, she said, her eyes locking onto his, do you have any explanation for your actions? Mustache stammered, his words coming out in a jumbled mess. We didn't know who he was, Your Honor. The judge leaned forward, her gaze sharp as a knife. And you thought that justified your behavior. She didn't wait for an answer. Ignorance doesn't excuse misconduct, she said firmly. Baldy, clearly desperate, tried to speak up, but his voice quivered as he said, we were just following protocol. Protocol? The judge snapped, her voice cutting through the room. Your protocol doesn't include racial profiling and fabricating charges. You've embarrassed this court and your department. By now, they looked like they wanted to sink into the floor, and disappear. The weight of their actions was crashing down on them, and they couldn't hide from it. The judge turned to me, her expression softening just a fraction. "Agent Wilson," she said, "the court apologizes for this injustice. Rest assured, disciplinary action will follow." I nodded, my voice steady. "Thank you, Your Honor. I trust the system will handle them appropriately." The gavel came down with a decisive thud, and it was over. Mustache and Baldy were officially on the hook, suspended, pending investigation, and likely facing charges themselves. As I walked out of the courtroom, the reporters swarmed, shouting questions at me from every angle. I didn't stop or slow down. I just tossed one line over my shoulder. Sometimes the bad guys wear badges, but the law doesn't play favorites. The reporters fell silent, and I could hear the shuffle of footsteps behind me as I made my way to my car. Free and vindicated, I couldn't help but smile. Justice had been served. I got in my car, the weight of the past 24 hours lifting off my shoulders, and I couldn't wait to drive away from it all. As the engine hummed to life, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Thank you all for listening to this story. We hope you enjoyed every twist, every turn, and every dose of well-deserved justice. If you want to hear more unique and powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to Life Mosaic so you never miss an update. We appreciate you, we value you, and most importantly, we love having you as part of our community. Thank you, and see you in the next story.